Hello and welcome back to Inform New Hampshire. My name is Dean Kern. This is my co-host Richie Merritt, and we're broadcasting every Monday at 6:30 p.m. on Manchester TV, and we read broadcast Thursdays 7:30 a.m., Saturdays 9 a.m., Sunday 2 p.m. You can also view us on our YouTube channel if you want to do a search for that. We are at Inform New Hampshire on YouTube. If you'd like to contact us via email, we have our email there on your screen, informnh@hushmail.com. For those of you who missed last week, we had our show was all about the Constitution, founding document of our country, and this week we're going to talk a little bit about some of the timeline flow of the structure of our country, how it was usurped, so to speak, in some ways by the British and by the Crown. So, yep. So, Richie, you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point for last week. Last week we talked about the Constitution, but it was specifically about our ignorance of the Constitution. So I wanted to tie in something with that, and it's intolerance. The reason I say that is because I'm not a young kid, as you can see, but when I was a young man, I used to remember Democrats and Republicans arguing back and forth about issues, and it was really nothing. You know, they'd walk away friends, shake hands. I said today, Democrats and Republicans, liberals, conservatives, they're at each other's throat. Actually lost one of my little brothers disowned me because of my views on things, which is okay. I'm not going to change my views on that, and he's entitled to his opinion. The point I'm trying to make is this. Regardless of what you are, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, you're entitled to your opinion. Your opinion shouldn't matter. And if you're talking about the Constitution, this book right here, there is nothing in here about homosexuality, gun control, drugs, Obamacare, none of this stuff. But the government pits us at one another, and it tears us apart. I still believe that people have entitled to their opinion. I don't care if it's different from mine. You're entitled to it, regardless of what it is, as am I. However, the only point I wanted to make is that let's stop being divided and come together as a nation and start fighting, center ourselves around this document, and we can save this country. And then this week and next is going to be an important week because we're going to be explaining to you exactly how our government has usurped powers from us, the people. We'll talk about that in another few minutes. Dean's going to bring that up.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a little something that I had here regarding the Constitution. The most important purpose of the U.S. Constitution is to confine, limit, constrict, and control the powers of the federal government. With a few exceptions, the focus of the Constitution is on the federal government and not on the individual American citizen. The purpose of the Constitution was to protect Americans from the immense power of the federal government. To illustrate this point, consider the following example. Suppose that while you were away, Jane Doe broke into your home, entered your bedroom, took several documents, and then left. Legally, none of your constitutional rights have been violated, nor have the Bill of Rights been violated. Clearly, you are the victim of criminal activity, but the Constitution has not been violated because the Constitution restricts the federal government. Since Jane Doe is a private citizen, the federal government is not involved. Now consider the same facts except for one change. Suppose that Jane Doe is a federal law enforcement officer. In this case, several of your constitutional rights have been violated. The breaking and entering and the taking of your property are all violations of the Constitution. The reason is Jane Doe is acting for the federal government. The Constitution requires that she first obtain a legal permission from a judge before entering your home. She must get a search warrant. The intent of the Constitution was to control the government, to limit the government's conduct, not the individual citizen. I think that's a great example because, you know, we've sort of drifted away from our understanding and even our participation in the Constitution. And nowadays, more than ever, you can see how pertinent it is to have controls on the federal government. It is completely out of control. And we're going to get a lot more into that in future shows, so hope you'll stick around for that.
I just wanted to add, too, that it was a great example. And if you're familiar with what's going on in Oregon with the Hammond Ranch and the Bundy Ranch and those things, um, it applies to that particular argument. The United States government has no authority to own land other than the 10 square miles that we gave them in Washington, D.C. Outside of that, they can't own any land anywhere. Yet, they're stealing people's land over there. I know why they're stealing it. It's for a very, very unscrupulous reason. They're stealing people's land, too. That's the key word here. And someone lost their life over it. But this type of thing has to stop, and it has to stop by we the people standing behind this Constitution. And I'll let Dean get back to reading you something that's very, very important. It was written by a Superior Court judge up in Alaska, Anna von Reitz.
All right, so
You can take it from there, Dean.
starting in 1754 to 1776, the United Colonies take shape and a loose political association, and the First and Second Continental Congress results. In 1776, the colonies declare independence. In 1781, 5 years later, the Articles of Confederation bind the states, political subdivision of the United Colonies together in a perpetual union, creating a confederation of states to operate in the international jurisdiction of the sea. Why a confederation instead of a federation? Because the original states gave up some of their natural jurisdiction to the new political entity, the Union, they created. In 1783, 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris and the Treaty of Versailles cements this arrangement, splitting the land and sea jurisdictions between the states and the federal union, and placing King George III as trustee of the American interests on the high seas and navigable inland waterways, which means he kept control of American international commerce. The new Union entity, operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea, was always controlled by the British, and it has always been the British monarch's responsibility as international trustee to manage it and guarantee its proper operation. It has instead run amok for 150 years. In 1787, 5 years later, the Supreme perfected Republican Declaration of the United Colonies creates the National Trust owed the continental United States. In 1789, 2 years later, the Constitution for the United States of America splits off the sea jurisdiction and creates the new federal United States. A year later, 1790, the federal United States forms a commercial company doing business as the United States Commercial Company to provide the 19 enumerated services agreed to by the subscribing states. In 1812, the British try to horn in again and are beaten back. The skirmish results in the Treaty of Ghent, where the British interests in American shipping and commerce are reaffirmed and lasting peace is promised in return. Then in 1845, the British monarch and Pope secretly agree to undermine the American system of government via the Treaty of Verona. The British monarch breaches the Treaty of Ghent, and both the Pope and the King secretly breach their trust as international trustees. They set out on a covert action and issued letters of marque and reprisal to the members of the bar associations, allowing them to act as foreign agents on American soil and as privateers free to plunder the American commerce. In 1860, thanks to the efforts of the bar associations, a member of the bar, Abraham Lincoln is elected to serve as president. Note that he is ineligible to serve as President of the United States of America by the title of nobility amendment to the actual Constitution, but is eligible to serve as President of the United States, the commercial company. This is the same situation we have with Barack Obama, who is ineligible to serve as President of the United States of America, but is able to serve as President of the United States Incorporated. In 1861, the Civil War begins. Congress adjourns for lack of quorum and without a date to reconvene. Lincoln organizes a Delaware corporation, and the remaining members of Congress begin functioning as a board of directors. In 1862, the Corporate Congress, a body of men no different than the board of directors of IBM or Target or any other corporation, changed the meaning of a single word, only and explicitly for the use in their corporation. That word is person. From then on, the word person is deemed to mean corporation for federal government purposes. 37th Congress, second session, Chapter 49, Section 68, if you want to look that up. 1863, Lincoln signed a labor code as commander-in-chief and puts the Union Army, the Grand Army of the Republic, in charge of the nation's future and money supply. A day later, he bankrupts the original United States Commercial Company. 1865, Lee's army surrenders to Grant, and a general armistice is declared. The southern states are in ruins and under military occupation by the Union. The original northern states are bankrupt. Foreign banks are in control of the new United States of America Incorporated, and the Union Army reigns supreme. Over the next 2 years, President Andrew Johnson will three times publicly declare peace on the land jurisdiction of the continental United States, but peace is never declared in the international jurisdiction of the sea controlled by the federal United States under the trusteeship of the British monarch. 1868, the Corporate Congress writes itself a new corporate constitution called the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, I just want to point out here that the original Constitution, yes, there are two. The original Constitution is the Constitution for the United States of America. And when in that title, United is not capitalized. In the new corporate Constitution for the United States, which is the one you read today, that one is a corporate mission statement. Basically, it's United States Incorporated, masquerading as the original Constitution it's the Constitution of the United States. Hope that made sense. So it's a look-alike, sound-alike private corporate document as if it were the actual Constitution. This is fraud on many levels. The Constitution of the United States of America purposefully sought to confuse and delude people into thinking it was the actual equity contract obligating the states to receive services and subrogate their international jurisdiction to the federal government. In 1871, the corporate Congress begins to set up shop for itself by creating a separate government for the District of Columbia. The initial effort fails, but 7 years later, the Washington, D.C. municipality is created as an independent international city-state run as a plenary oligarchy by the members of Congress. Also in 1871, the corporate Congress claims to own all United States corporations. That you can look up in the 41st Congress, 3rd session, chapters 62, 63, 64, and 65. In 1874 to 1885, all the actual states on the land are recognized, and the same time completely new federal states are created and new state constitutions are written for them. The original states on the land are renamed in this process. The original state of Ohio operating the land jurisdiction became the Ohio state, while the usurping federal state, merely a corporate franchise of the United States of America Incorporated, operating in the international jurisdiction of the sea, took over the name State of Ohio. So in other words, they did the same thing with each of the states. They incorporated them, they renamed them, but they're masquerading as though they are the originals. In 1904, still lusting after more power for itself, the corporate Congress set up a second shop for itself and obtained permission to do it from the Supreme Court in a series of cases known as the insular tariff cases. As with setting up the Washington, D.C. municipality as a foreign city-state on our shores and running it as their own little oligarchy, the Congress now took the federal territories and possessions and made a new union of American states, Puerto Rico, Guam, et al., and began calling it United States of America minor. They just forgot to add the minor part of the name from then on and let the people assume that all the repugnant laws they passed governing this constitutional democracy also applied to the continental United States. So again, fraud on a very massive scale. 1912 to 1913, a private association of European and American banks calling themselves the Federal Reserve bought the Government Services Corporation known as the United States of America Incorporated and its state franchises as a business venture and began operating such familiar agencies as the United States Department of Agriculture, United States Department of Transportation, and private for-profit businesses without telling anyone. They exercised the government powers they didn't really possess in a vast fraud scheme in collusion with members of Congress to institute a fiat monetary system and misuse their position of trust to put competitors out of business, set up monopolies, rig commodity markets, and commit other acts of blatant self-interested criminality and fraud. In 1917, engaged in a war for profit, Congress and their banker bosses passed the War Powers Act and the Trading with the Enemies Act and numerous other illegal and repugnant acts pertaining only to the federal United States and the international jurisdiction of the sea, but presented them to the public as if this claptrap pertained to the actual states and the people on the land of the continental United States. Deceived by this venal and purposeful fraud, millions of Americans complied, and what they believed to be the law passed by a legitimate Congress acting as deputies of the states and the people. In 1918, once in control of the monetary system, the Federal Reserve increased the monetary supply exponentially, causing the Roaring Twenties. They built the House of Cards, and on October 29, 1933, they collapsed it deliberately. This enabled them to put thousands of competitors out of business, allowing them to buy up commodities, land, and labor for dirt cheap, and to manipulate the value of the dollar to their benefit. So yes, the Great Depression was orchestrated and was perpetuated for a long number of years unnecessarily to the detriment of the American people. Horrifying if you think about it. 1933 to 1940, the banks took full advantage of the national emergency. They created the Alien Registration Act, the Social Security Act, the Emergency Banking Act, and more. The purpose of all this was to lay claim to the labor and the assets of the states and people of the continental United States by securing private contracts with them, enabling the perpetrators to represent them and to set up corporations in their names. Hundreds of millions of Americans were told that they had to sign up for Social Security and have a Social Security number in order to have a job, that it was the law and that Congress had passed it. And so, believing it to be lawful government mandate, when in fact it was a corporate fraud scheme, they were subscribed en masse. Remembering now the actions of the corporate Congress in 1862, redefining the word person to mean corporation, the federal purposes, and their later claim made in 1871 to hold ownership interest in all the United States corporations, and seeing that their actions from 1933 to 1940 resulted in redefining the estates of living Americans as public trusts, that is, as a form of corporation. You can see that the corporate Congress has claimed to own living Americans as assets belonging to their corporation, and has also claimed to control and own their private assets, in flagrant violation of the Geneva Convention Protocols, Volumes 2, Article 3, and in equally flagrant violation of the 1926 International Conventions on Slavery, and in violation of every lawful and moral duty, commercial contract, and trust indenture owed to the continental United States of the American people. It is also apparent that all of this, every claim, every salvation lien, every title, land, and property held under color of law, being held against the continental United States and the living civilian inhabitants of the continental United States, is pure self-interested commercial fraud created and perpetuated under conditions of semantic deceit, constructive fraud, misrepresentation, and mischaracterization by the management of the federal United States, the various governmental services corporations doing business as some form of United States, and the British government. From 1940 to the present time, among the first actions to be taken by the criminals was to register all live births. This established a claim of ownership on the baby and his or her estate benefiting the state of Ohio or other federal state franchises. This act of identity theft exercised via an undisclosed enforced contract with the mother of the child allowed each state franchise to control the name and the property of the baby. The perpetrators promptly set up new state franchises benefiting themselves using names styled like this. John Quincy Adams, spelled out in all caps. That's how they identify you as a corporation. So when you look on your license or your registration or your social security card, you'll find that it's all capital letters. That's not by accident, and that's not so you can read it better. That's because that is a corporation, and that corporation is registered and traded, and it is owned. The states and the United States pretend to own it. So the purpose for creating these franchises structured as various kinds of trusts was to act as a means for the privately owned government services corporations to hypothecate debt against the labor of the living people and their private property assets to exercise control over them, amounting to slavery. So what is next? Declaration of law. Maybe we'll get into that later. So there it is, you guys. Brutal. So your birth certificate was actually designed to sign over, to create a corporation in your name. Your mother signed you over to the state, and that's why the so-called family courts can send over I got to be nice here, an uneducated and unlawful person to just literally take your kids from you. That's why they can overtax you, overregulate you, overcontrol you. There are no laws governing how you drive or walk across the street, but there are plenty of statutes. There are plenty of codes that they use. You want to jump in here at all, Richie?
Yes. What I would like to say that's very important, if what Dean read is probably overwhelming because it's a very tough pill to swallow, and it was for me when I first heard about this. Excuse me. But I want to tell you a couple things. It's a little disheartening when you find out that you're living in a matrix and you're on the wrong side, but we are. We're all debt slaves in America, all of us, with the exception of the people running the program. Your governor, the attorney general. The three biggest enemies that we face in this country, and we have to get rid of them, is the banks, and I'm talking about the international banks, not the corner banks, but the international banking community, which is Rothschild, number one. The Bar Association, which we talked about last week, the British Accreditation Registry, where lawyers take an oath to them, and they are a communist organization. You can check that out. And the third one is the IRS. The IRS is owned by Northern Trust Incorporated. They're not even a government agency. Yet if you don't pay your taxes, they'll come down and kick your door in, and they'll seize your assets. Now, if that's not crazy, I don't know what is. But I wanted to mention a few things. If you have a paper and pencil handy, I'll try to talk for a few seconds here while you get one. I'm going to give you some documentaries and possibly a book to read. It's a very small book, and all of this is free. I don't believe in causing any burden to anybody financially. But some of the documentaries you can look at is What Happened to the Constitution. Just type that in YouTube, and it'll come up. It's a very, very good documentary. Another one is Season of Treason. It's by Kurt Kellenbach. He does a very, very good job. I disagree with what he says at the end, but he does a very, very good job. And there's also a book on Google. You can just Google this. It's Shinola 101 by Gary R. Owen. It's free. It's a 98-page book. You can download it, print it out, or read it on the screen, whatever you want to do. But it's very informative, and it explains it a little bit better than what Dean just read. Dean just read something from an attorney. This is from just Gary. I don't know the man, but he's a great-grandfather, and he just wrote this book to help people out. That's why me and Dee decided to do this show. We want to help people out. We want to wake people up. I'll say this very blatantly, and next week we're going to talk about it in more detail. We are right now living in a communist country. It's communist. There's no question about it. Next week, we will demonstrate that to you. And the week after, I believe, too, we're going to be talking about something known as CAFRs. But, well, for a week or so, take my word for it. We'll get into it in great detail. And if you watch those videos and you read that book, take the time to do it. Your country is at peril right now. All of us. Our freedoms are. We're going to expose that next week in particular, but you'd be amazed. Tell your friends to watch, please. There's nothing here that we're trying to shock everybody. We have the documentation and the proof to share with you, and we want to enlighten people. You're our fellow citizens, our fellow Americans, and I don't care what your opinions are. This book, the Constitution, and this is of the United States. This is the fake one. The wording is still the same. They just changed the meaning of the words. Only in the Constitution for the United States, we never gave them the power to define words. We gave them the power to make laws. So it's all a fraud. Our whole government is corrupt from top to bottom. And you have to know this. The more people that know it, the better off we'll be, and the quicker we'll get rid of these thugs.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate the Shinola 101. That's a great document that will, you know, it's maybe 100 pages. Will really help you to understand what's happened over time. You know, I read you just a timeline there from Anna von Reitz, but Shinola 101 is a great document to read. It will really informative, really help you understand things. I want to mention something real quick about the Fed. As we mentioned in this document I read in 1913, you know, a group of international bankers met at Jekyll Island, and they snuck in the Fed as the new banking system. There were a number of presidents in the past that fought off the bankers, but they lost this time, and the Feds got in there. They are a private corporation. It's international bankers that own the Fed. They create our currency, and I just want to make an example here. This says on it $1, but it's a debt instrument. And what that means is that when the Fed creates this little piece of paper, which has no value whatsoever, they charge us $1 to make this. But they don't just charge us $1. It costs them, you know, a penny to make this thing. They charge us $1. Plus, they charge us interest on this dollar. So let me ask you something. If the Fed gives us this dollar and charge us interest to have the dollar plus the dollar, how do we pay it back? It's a scam. There's no way to pay this back. You can't have enough dollars to pay back $1 plus the interest. It puts us into perpetual debt. That's called debt slavery. So that's how that's operating. Now, we have, well, Richie and I, again, we're committed to sharing news and information that you won't find in the mainstream media. We believe this country is in deep peril, and the people who are running this scam are very close to collapsing this currency. If you read some of the news channels, you'll find that there are other currencies around the globe that have lost 20 to 30, even 50% of their value. There's a lot happening there. We hope that you'll listen to some of the things we say and read some of the documents so that you can educate yourself. That's our goal, is to educate people and just you know, bring some of the information that's been held in the dark and bring it into the light so you can decide for yourself. Richie and I are state coordinators for the National Liberty Alliance. National Liberty Alliance is committed to bringing grand juries back into the hands of we the people. It is a tool for us, we the people, to meet in private and in secret and deliberate on criminal activity or fraud that's happening in the government. It's a way for us to control and root out corruption in our governments. The National Liberty Alliance you can find them at nationallibertyalliance.org. You can become a member. Richie and I hold weekly meetings every Wednesday for the National Liberty Alliance right here in Manchester, and anyone's welcome to attend. We got about a minute. Richie, what do you want to add?
The only thing I'd like to add is next week should be very, very informative. We're going to expose the corruption and the fraud that goes on in the government. That was a little bit of a taste of it. We're going to get into more detail with the birth certificate and licenses and permits. And in 2 weeks, we're going to have an announcement for you that I hope you find favorable. We'll see. I would also like to suggest to everybody listening out there, no matter where you live or work, consider running for office. If you're going to take back your government, it's up to you to do it. Run for dog catcher, city council, whatever, county administrator, whatever position you feel comfortable doing. Run for it. Take your government back from the thugs that are running it. And with that, I thank you for watching. I hope you tune us in next week.
Thanks for watching us. We'll see you next week.